Going dark. Sometimes a company wants to deregister its stock from registration with the SEC, delist its securities from a stock exchange, no longer file 10Ks, 10Qs. This is known as going dark. Today on Zippy Point. I'm Brock Romanek and I'm a big fan of news. So companies go dark voluntarily all the time. They no longer want the hassle of being a public company perhaps. Maybe they want to list on a stock exchange in another country and want to remove themselves from the US markets. Perhaps the company is going through a troubled time and needs to try to get its act together, and it just can't bother with the expense and hassle of filing reports with the SEC. So let me try to nutshell the process. First, you have to do your homework. You're going to check state law to see if there's anything you need to do with the state. Review any arrangements you have with private placements. Do you have any registration rights agreements? Review your loan, indentures, and other contracts to determine if you have any covenants, any provisions that require you to continue to file your 34 Act reports with the SEC, to continue to file 10Qs and 10Ks. If you don't have any of these contractual state law restrictions, then it's time for the board to act, obtain board approval, that it's in the best interests of shareholders, the best interests of the company to do this. Consider the rights of minority shareholders, all that fiduciary duty stuff, which is beyond the scope of this Vid-Guide. Then shareholder approval. It likely won't be required, but it may be if it involves the sale of a company. So that's the good news. No shareholder approval. That makes this process a lot easier. So now let's go through the mechanical process. If your stock is listed on a stock exchange, the New York Stock Exchange or Nasdaq, you have to inform the exchange in writing at least 10 days prior to filing a Form 25 with the SEC. You need to give the exchange time to get ready to remove the listing. And to know exactly what you need to do for this process, you should contact your representative at the exchange. But you're going to look at if you're on the NYSE, Rule 80602, and if you're on Nasdaq, Rule 4840J. And you need to provide written notices to the exchange. As part of the written notification to the exchanges, you're going to include the board resolution that approved the removal of stock from registration, the removal of the listing from the stock exchange. As part of this process, then you issue a press release informing the market that you plan to delist, including the reasons for doing so. The reasons don't have to be too detailed. It's too costly to keep being a public company. You intend to move to another market. You're in a troubled state, whatever it is, and you post this press release on your corporate website. This press release is then filed as part of a Form 8K filed with the SEC under Item 3.01. I have a separate Vid-Guide about Item 301 8Ks, a link to which is beneath this videos. So this press release process is posting the press release on the corporate website. That's part of the NYSE and Nasdaq rules. So if your company's stock is listed on an exchange, your stock is registered under Section 12B of the 34 Act, and you need to file a Form 25 with the SEC. It's a simple form, a one-pager, as you can see, and you also have to give a copy of the Form 25 to your stock exchange. That's required by the stock exchange rules. This Form 25 becomes effective 90 days after being filed with the SEC, meaning the stock is considered deregistered from Section 12B at that time. However, that Form 25 also acts to officially delist your stock from the stock exchange, and that time period is 10 days after the filing of the Form 25. So there are two different separate timelines here: 90 days for deregistration, 10 days for delisting. You need to file Form 25 for each exchange your company stock is listed on if you're delisting from more than one stock exchange, but you can delist more than one class of securities on a single Form 25 if each class you're deregistering is listed on a single stock exchange. Okay, here's where some people get tripped up. The three sections relating to registration and reporting under the 34 Act are like a ladder. The lowest rung is Section 15D, the middle rung is Section 12G, and the top rung is Section 12B. I remember getting taught this early when I went to work at the SEC right out of law school, one of the first trainings I went to. So class of securities is never on more than one rung of this three-step ladder at any time. So if you deregister from the top rung, 12B, you might wind up then on the next rung down, 12G, and then once you deregister there, you might even go one rung further down to the lowest step, 15D, when you deregister from 12G. So a company must remember each rung when it is going back down the ladder if you start this deregistration process. So in other words, when your stock is deregistered from Section 12B, when you're filing that Form 25, you might have Section 12G obligations that you used to have that spring back to life. They were dormant while you were on the top rung, but now you've gone down the top rung to the middle rung. And those 12G obligations automatically revive if you have them. And when you deregister from Section 12G, your Section 15D obligations might spring back if you have those. It's an odd concept, and it does indeed trip people up. I might be getting too much into the weeds here, but as noted as in this Morrison and Foerster memo, the most common situation when you deregister your securities from Section 12B and then you used to have a Section 12G obligation is if your company securities are listed on the Nasdaq and has been listed on Nasdaq for a long time, before 2006. 2006 is when Nasdaq became an official national securities exchange. And so that's at that point when companies were listed on the Nasdaq, their securities were registered under Section 12B as in boy and not Section 12G. Okay, so let's talk about how you deregister your securities from Section 12G. One of these three things must happen. One, the number of record holders of a class falls below 300. Two, the number of record holders of a class falls below 500. And the company's assets have been no more than $10 million as of the end of each of the last 3 fiscal years. And three, it's a bank holding company. That's what the type of company we're talking about. And it has fewer than 1,200 record holders. Computations, the definition of what is a record holder is governed by Rule 12G5(1). If you believe you meet one of these 3 thresholds, then you can file a Form 15 with the SEC to deregister your securities from the 34 Act under Section 12G. So if your company has fewer than 300 record holders, Section 12G registration is effective by operation of law. It happens automatically. So filing that Form 15 is really for notification purposes only, and it's effective immediately. Otherwise, Form 15 is effective 90 days after filing. And once you file that Form 15, your obligations to file 10Ks, 10Qs, 8Ks are suspended immediately, but you still have obligations to file Section 16 reports, proxies with the SEC for that 90-day period until the Form 15 is effective. So here's a nice chart from this Dorsey and Whitney memo about what obligations continue to exist while waiting for a Form 25, a Form 15 to become effective. So let's talk about dropping off the next rung of the ladder. Once a company's 12G registration is terminated, the company's reporting obligations under Section 15D would be revived if the company has ever filed a registration statement under the 33 Act, like an IPO on a Form S-1. But notably, those Section 15D obligations can be suspended usually on the same Form 15 that's filed to terminate your Section 12G obligations, as noted in Rule 12G4. So let me briefly explain. Section 15D obligations can only be suspended. They're not terminated like they are for Section 12 obligations. So it's suspended, not terminated, meaning they can be revived later on. There is automatic suspension of a Section 15D obligation in one of 2 cases. One, you have a Section 12 registration, so you've moved further up the ladder and you can only be on one rung of the 3-step ladder at a time. So if you move further up the ladder, your 15D obligations are suspended. They can be revived later on if you deregister from higher up on the ladder, remember. And then the second case is if your number of record holders falls below 300 on the first day of the fiscal year, other than when a registration statement became effective. So that was automatic suspension. Let's talk about voluntary suspension of 15D obligations. Here you look to Rule 12H3 to see if you're eligible to use that Form 15 to also suspend your 15D obligations. And there's 3 conditions. You're current in your filings of your periodic reports, your 10Qs, your 10Ks. Your number of record holders is either below 300 or below 500, and you have fewer than 10 million in assets as of the last day of each of the 3 most recent fiscal years. And then you look to Rule 12H3C about an effective registration statement or one that's being updated during this past fiscal year, which means that you want to withdraw or terminate any 33 Act registration statement, deregister any unsold shares by filing a post-effective amendment to any registration statement you have with any unsold shares. And this includes any Form S-8s. And here's an example of an S-8 that's deregistering shares by filing a post-effective amendment. You can't have any active registration statements in order to suspend your 15-day obligations. So you want to look at that Morrison and Foerster memo, that Dorsey and Whitney memo, to better understand the suspension of 15-day obligations. It can be confusing, I know. And you also want to look at CorpFin's Staff Legal Bulletin number 18 that came out about a decade ago, which provided blanket relief for any companies seeking to rely on Rule 12H3 to avoid filing periodic reports that would otherwise be due after a company is acquired, after it's bought, or if there's an IPO that is subsequently abandoned. So to sum this all up, let's look at a timeline for what deregistration might look like. On day one, you're getting board approval, you're getting a board resolution, then you're going to notify your stock exchange where your company's stock is listed that you're voluntarily delisting the stock. You're going to issue a press release informing the market that you plan to delist, including the reasons that you're doing so in that press release. And then you're going to post this press release on your corporate website. And then on day 11 or later, you're going to file your Form 25 with the SEC. And then 10 days after that, let's call it day 21, the Form 25 delisting is effective. And then you can file your Form 15 if you want. Then on day 101, your Section 12B deregistration is now effective because you filed that Form 25 90 days ago. And then 10 days later, on day 111, your deregistration under Section 12G and your suspension of reporting under Section 15D is effective if you check both those boxes on your Form 15 because you were eligible to do so. That's it in a nutshell. Let me know what you think.